Hello.
Hi, Elena. How are you?
I am fighting with the Germans to let me into the country, and they keep saying no.
Oh,
How
yeah.
is? Are you in Stockholm? Where are you?
Kind of. Just outside Stockholm.
Okay.
Playing chess at the seaside, as you see.
Yes, of course. The mask is very nice. I looked at that and thought that is very Swedish. But you
Yeah.
aren't Swedish, are you?
No, I'm Dutch.
That's what I thought. It's a very Dutch name.
Yeah,
A very Swedish background. They've gotten to you.
Yeah, no, I really chose it because of the pandemic. This movie plays in the times of plague and playing chess with death. So.
But I mean, chess is so wonderful because the rules are so strict, right? You must find ingenuity and fortitude within a very limited set of rules, right? The virus is
Actually,
beholden to no such thing.
Yeah. Actually, I am even more neat in that aspect because I'm myself a draughts player, which is checkers in England, which has even more straightforward and direct rules.
Okay.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
And I see Lorenzo is also there today. Lorenzo, I don't see you.
Hello. No, I am invisible.
Okay.
No, I'm just outside on my phone, so everything is really complicated.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm reading through the paper. It's great. I put some comments there. But,
okay, that's nice to say.
Yeah. No, I've also been involved in the estimation paper with the data challenges and so on, given I've worked for quite a bit on that.
Yeah.
And we are, I mean, we are at a couple of completely disjoint paragraphs that make no sense, and a lot of bullet point lists, and and we don't know what we are doing or saying. So it's much better.
Okay, well, that's good to hear because I always have the feeling, progress is quite slow.
Yes, but it's been much slower in other parts.
And Lorenzo and Peter, do you want to help with the writing? I mean, do you want to also contribute because you haven't been in the meetings the last couple of weeks?
I was sorry. You go.
Okay. Now I just want to hear and whether I can contribute something. I don't want to push myself into it.
Oh well, I'm sure you can always contribute something.
So. Yeah, we'll see.
I'd love to contribute. Up to now, last week I said I was kind of emerging from a moment of huge admin problems, and what happened instead since then is that I had to fight HR for a week, given we've just employed somebody who Francesca, who is Italian, and we are now going through Brexit and the pandemic, so she needs a visa, so she can't come to the UK. So the university thinks that she well, we told her she's going to work from abroad because she can't be in the UK. And now the university is freaking out because the university has some obligation for people working from abroad that I wasn't aware of. And so it's basically like Francesca starts on Monday, and we couldn't guarantee her a salary for Monday because the university has lots of kind of bureaucratic issues to solve. And we are in a hurry, of course, to employ her to work on COVID. Because employing her at the end of the pandemic makes no sense. So we're in a situation where we are telling people not to move, not to travel, but we're telling people if they want to work for us to tell people not to work or to travel, they have to come here for sure, immediately. And they can't because they don't have a visa. So that's kind of the situation. So I had no time. I came last week to the meeting. You weren't there, Miriam.
Oh, yeah, right.
I participated last week. I said I would have written something, but I haven't,
Mhm.
obviously.
Yeah.
But I would like to. So I know that there is a deadline on 1st of March for kind of sending something to Hans, as far as I've understood. Hans
I think
estimate.
it's end of March.
End of March.
Isn't it, Valerie?
No, end of March is a final submission,
I
but I thought it was kind of
The
informal.
aim was, yes, as Lorenzo says, the end of March to have something nearly ready to submit. And in
Oh, yeah.
order to give Hans and others time to sort of make a few comments at a time when there's still a chance of, you know, revision and adding new challenges or whatever. We thought, you know, any time from the beginning of March would be good. But I mean, inevitably, timescales for some of the papers are going to slip a bit. I mean, it was a question of setting some targets.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay,
So,
I hadn't heard about this.
We're doing, you know, in another week or two, you could well be ready to send something for comment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to send anything to Hans that is like only half ready.
Exactly.
Because
No,
that's
it's-
only additional work for him.
Sure.
Okay, but good to know that there's this deadline for Hans as well that we should somehow take into account.
Well, we obviously don't want to land him with a dozen or so papers to read
No,
simultaneously. So if we can space them out a bit.
yeah, I mean, I can
Yeah.
contact him and ask him what he wants, because
I think just wait until we're you know,
yeah.
a bit closer to ready, and then
Yeah, because I mean, I have a project with him, so I communicate anyway with him regularly. So I can just ask him whether because he also wanted to be actually actively included in this intervention challenges chapter. So maybe he also would appreciate if there's still some room for contributing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing, that although excuse me, Hans offered to read all the papers, obviously because he hadn't really had time to get involved in writing them.
Yeah,
he still might like to, there was still time for him to be included, and this was one of the obvious ones.
Yeah.
For that.
Right.
So obviously, if he gets involved in writing, then that's one that he won't take the sort of independent reviewer role for. So, but certainly he can still be involved in writing this.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I'll just ask him about it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I think I already mentioned to you, Valerie, or some of you before, Dennis, for example. So Helena is working with me. There is another postdoc, Chris, who might be very good at, in particular, the estimation stuff, but possibly might want to be involved in this one. And then Francesca will start working for us. Miriam, you might know Francesca already. She worked with Odo quite a lot.
What's her last name?
Scarabell.
Oh yeah, I know her. Yeah, she was in Helsinki before, I thought.
She was in Helsinki and then in Canada. Now she's starting working for us from Monday.
Oh yeah, I met her in Helsinki.
So I thought she would be another potentially valuable contributor. She's worked quite a lot on COVID in Canada. I obviously didn't want to drag people in without kind of asking whether people are happy. So
yeah,
that's why I haven't.
I mean, so there is still actually a section of this paper where up to now nobody has been actively working on it, and that's the section on pharmaceutical interventions like vaccination and test and treat strategies. Of course, there is also going to be a separate vaccination chapter, so we don't want to write a lot about vaccination, but still, I think, I mean, it should be mentioned, and we should write a little bit. We should at least mention some of the challenges, because it's for completeness, and also the topic of treatment as prevention, which is an important topic in the HIV field. I think we should also mention at least. So that would be an area still. I don't know whether any of the people you mentioned, Lorenzo, would be
willing to contribute. Yeah, I think, yeah. I'm not sure exactly how much they know about vaccination, but because it's part of the, we are trying to introduce it in the models that do data fitting and short-term forecasts, then it would probably, I'm sure they can say something valuable, or can at least take kind of a bit of a lead in those sections. So happy to bring more arms in, but at the same time, I just wanted to make sure that people are happy with me doing that rather than just going behind people's backs.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it should then also be the case that they really write something that.
Of course. If they don't contribute, they don't.
Yeah.
No, that's obviously.
So yeah, you can ask them and see what they think about it themselves.
Yeah.
And then we also still miss the section 7, the challenges in health, economic, and political aspects. That's what Matt wanted to write about, but it hasn't materialized yet. At least I didn't find anything in a Dropbox.
Yes, that's a good point. I'm getting confused because Mike Tildesley, his name appeared next to challenge 3, developing a theoretical framework to understand transmission.
Yeah, that's true. So challenge 3, the text that we have now, was written by Robin, Mike Tildesley, and
the Warwick
Ben Ashby.
Yep.
But then we had last time, or the time before, Matt Quaife, who agreed to write something on the economic modeling part, but he hasn't done anything yet, as far as I know.
I put a couple of comments there. I could try to work a little bit on the vaccination. The main problem I have is that I tend to say I can do it, and then something comes
we
up.
know the problem, Lorenzo.
I'm sure you do. I just, will I ever learn that I should not promise anything?
Yeah.
Want to say that?
Yeah, maybe Ghana, you also, I don't know if I know that you have a lot of things to do, but you're now also writing about vaccination anyway. So if you want to.
I think I should team up with somebody, because I still couldn't get to Yasmina. I don't know whether she's on holidays or not. And she hasn't still, I mean, she seems to want to help, but she didn't look, at least critically, at least what I was writing or anything. So I can help, but then I should team up like with Lorenzo, that we take over this data section and vaccination section and write something there together. I mean, if that's fine with you, for example.
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah, and then everybody else will criticize.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind that there will be another paper on vaccination. So this shouldn't be very extensive. It's more like giving a rough idea what are the challenges, and then referring to this other paper that's going to be written by Bets Halloran and I don't know, Claudio. I don't know who else.
Yeah. So it shouldn't be.
So it shouldn't be like extensive and
Okay, I think that's that, and the section should be really challenges of modeling vaccination, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, also a good idea to see what's written already in the other one.
Yeah.
But I mean, the difficulty was the modeling, is that many things are uncertain. Like when the vaccines are developed, you still don't know what exactly the effects will be. So I think from my point of view, I don't know whether Lorenzo, whether you meant the same, that you can do it, and then you think, oh well, how is this and how is that? how does it work?
Yeah, and keep in mind that we are not, I mean, this is not only about COVID-19, but it's like thinking about future pandemics. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's I think it's the same.
yeah, of course. But I mean,
For a fast
let's
moving,
say we don't have to talk in detail about the specific issues of COVID vaccines. It's more to think about, what if, let's say, vaccination is developed during such a pandemic? What kind of problems or challenges do we have as modelers to, let's say, effectively or say something about the effectiveness of vaccination or possibly vaccination strategies?
Mhm.
But you're right, we should actually know what's going to be in this other paper. Valerie, do
We
you
can write it and can check what we can do.
There,
Yeah.
excuse me, if you look in the Dropbox, are some notes, and it is only in the sort of fairly note form, but there's a 4A vaccination challenge paper dated the 4th of February. So
Okay, yeah.
there is an outline. I think they've done
Yeah.
more work since then, as far
Okay.
as I know. So there'll probably be an update fairly soon, but it would at least give you an outline of the sort of things they were planning to cover.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Lorenzo, we will write something, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, well,
That one of the hidden reasons for why I'm happy for other people in my group to kind of join in is that they can kind of compensate for my failures, really. If I can't write something,
I also feel the same. Well,
but yes,
okay.
yes, it will be yes,
Okay.
Well, it's nicer to fail together than
exactly,
to fail
exactly,
alone.
exactly. So yes, it would be good. It would be easier for me also to kind of focus on a small section and do something there rather than trying to read everything and comment on everything.
Yeah. I think that's the nice thing about writing with many co-authors, that you can really focus on a small bit, and then we just have to put it together. Yeah, sounds easy, but yeah, another question that we then kind of are approaching is whether we should still keep on working in separate documents, or whether we should actually work in one document so that we have kind of a complete draft of it. I don't know, what are your opinions on it? I think we are, let's say, nearing that stage where it makes sense to work in one document, because you have, I mean, you can put the references in one place, and you can kind of, you see what's written already in other sections, and you can refer to that.
I think I would agree. The only thing that I think that everybody who like wrote a certain section should copy it himself into the main document, because there are certain things that like you think whether that should be still copied, like some comments or some
Yeah.
things or not, and then the person who wrote it then can decide somehow, what
Yeah.
goes, what doesn't go. Because previous time you combine things, but there were also some comments. So I mean,
Yeah. Okay, so we could now say, let's work together in a Google Docs document. In one, not like one for every chapter, but in one big document that everybody can access and edit.
But I like the idea of multiple versions of the same document floating around and no one knows what has been.
Yeah,
added.
that's a bit the problem with the Dropbox. I mean, you upload things and then there are multiple files with the same name, and you don't know anymore.
I was being sarcastic. Yeah, exactly.
So that's starts getting a bit confusing. I mean, alternatively, we could work with Overleaf to create a text document if people like that more.
It's easier for references because then it's nice.
It's easier for references, but maybe more complicated with commenting on what other people have written.
And there is a comment option still there, I think, but yeah, I mean, I'm not,
Mm.
for me, I think anything's fine.
If I
Uh,
could jump in for a second. Sorry,
Yes.
Miriam.
Sure.
I think having a unified document would be really helpful. We're also at the stage we're trying to figure out how much more needs to be cut. And
Mhm.
part of the issue we're having is that we're not sure how much of what is currently in our section, so a definition of what we consider to be NPIs by a certain category or links to other parts of the paper, we're not sure how much of that we need to take out or whether it needs to be moved somewhere else.
Yeah.
Obviously we can copy that in, but we probably do need someone to make some editorial decisions about moving things to other places.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that should be me, it definitely shouldn't, but we need someone to do that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I agree.
I think, could I suggest just from a logistic point of view that the putting in one document should be in two stages. That first, people who are in charge of each section should make sure that it is up to date. If it's got comments and so on, they should decide whether to accept these comments or reject them so as to have a clean, simple document. And they should make sure that the name starts with the number. I think one of the problems I have just looking at this, is a very trivial problem, just looking at this directory, is some people have stuck to the rule of having the name beginning with 4.1 or 4.6 or something, and it's a bit confusing when it doesn't. But for instance, the people in charge of 4.6, so I see there are two versions of 4.6. So if whoever's in charge of that should decide which is the proper version and tidy it up, as I suggested, accepting or rejecting comments. And then I suggest, if you look, there's an archive folder. So if you think it's worth keeping the old copy, just in case there's some bits we want to recover later, you can put it in the archive. So you leave in this folder a single document whose name begins with 4.6. Okay, so if we could all agree to do that by a certain time, maybe Monday or Tuesday, something like that, then I think one person, probably Miriam, should then just copy all of those into one big document.
Well, that's what I did now with the files that are there.
Yeah.
And that document starts with chapter 4.
Yeah. Well, I suppose there's an alternative. Whoever's in charge of 4.6, alternatively, of course, could say that the version of 4.6 they like best is what is already in the unified chapter 4 document.
Yeah, there was also two versions because we originally transferred across to Google Documents and then found that those didn't work. So I can get rid of the Google Doc because I don't think we're able to access those collectively.
I can try to make a new Google Doc document that can be accessed, because the document that's here for section 4.3, that can be accessed. So that's so there is a way to make a Google Doc that can be accessed from the Dropbox.
Well, that would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Before they've got, or at least they appear to have different endings, and I don't know quite how you determine which ending you get, but I think it was the one that ended with web.
Yeah.
Was
Robin
accessible
sent
to
me
everybody, and the other one
Robin
wasn't.
sent me instructions how to do it, so I can try it out.
The other quick thing, because I was just looking at the latest chapter 4. Did you say something about waiting for some stuff from Matthew Quaife? Because there is quite a lot in section 7, isn't there? In this.
But
I mean, it sounds as if he's going to do some more work on it.
I haven't seen any text from him, so.
Well, in what I thought, maybe I'm opening the wrong thing. I think I'm looking at the one that was dated 26th of February, which is today.
Yeah.
And it's got a section 7 with text from him.
Oh yeah, no, that's not the one that's not my document. I don't know where you got that.
Well, it's just in my Dropbox. I don't know where I
Oh.
got it.
I mean, I uploaded today a document that's called Chapter 4 and so forth, with the ending 26th of February. And there I copy and pasted what I found in the other files into one document. But
Well,
there is no text for 4.7.
Can somebody else look? Because I'm baffled, because that's the file that I'm clicking on and apparently opening, and it's the top one in my my directory, with today's date, and there's a section 7 written by Matthew.
Oh, really?
So
that's strange.
I stumbled across similar problems. It's possible your Dropbox folder is so full that it wouldn't update. If you've reached the 2 GB limit of the free account with Dropbox, it will not update files.
Oh, okay. So maybe I don't actually see everything that people have uploaded.
But well, I'm still confused, because I thought, looking at the version that Miriam posted today.
Yeah, but that's, I mean,
And you're not seeing
know,
this section 7, and I'm seeing a section 7. So
with text in it?
Yeah, with about 2 pages of text.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
How is that possible?
So can anybody else see this, or is it just me?
It seems to be, mine has 3 bullet points in section 7.
Mine
Well,
too. This is brilliant. Valerie, you see more stuff than it's there.
Well, I don't understand. It's
the
definitely
paper is writing
26th
itself.
is today's date. I mean, there are 2, well, in that I can see in the Dropbox. There's another one with the 19th.
Yeah, that was the one I uploaded last
week.
Can anybody see on page 2 of the document with the date of today? There is a small paragraph on page 2 that is like track change that I just added. That said, I'd also think a comment on the fact that we can never guess policy and what changes policy does on transmission.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, but I can't. So
so you must.
I don't know
looking at a different version.
This is very peculiar. I'm going to shut all these down.
No, don't shut it down. Copy.
No.
By email to everyone.
Well,
so we have more text ready that only you have.
Yeah, so maybe.
But I mean, this is.
Maybe Matt copied something into the file after I uploaded it, but
you see, now I've opened it again and it's not there now. I've just got to
no, it's
gone. Oh, now it's lost.
So this is.
I don't see it either.
Too late.
What the hell?
You should have copied it.
I was so hoping.
Okay, but look in the version, the earlier version, the 19th version, and I think it's in that.
Ah, okay.
So,
maybe Matt copied it into there.
Yeah, it's definitely in that one.
The 19th.
The one from a week ago. There's a section 7.
Yeah, I see that.
So.
Yeah, okay, I see. Now I see it. So that's last week's version.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. Well, I'm not sure what the difference between the 2 is. There are other differences, but obviously he did actually post something.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. Then I will copy that into the new version as well. Okay, so obviously Matt didn't make a separate file for this section, but just put his text into this overall document.
I guess so. I'm glad that's sorted anyway.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's great. Okay, so then I will try to make a Google Docs document for the whole chapter. And then, yeah, I think what Dennis said, that everybody, let's say, should paste their latest version into that Google Docs. That makes sense. Then we have an overall document that contains everything that we have up to now in the latest version. And then we start from there, and everybody can comment and put in text and work on it.
Can I ask a couple of questions about the test that is actually there?
Yeah, sure.
More on the science rather than on the practicalities of doing this.
Yeah.
On page 2,
Mhm.
there is a discussion about various types of data, biological data, behavioral data, and so on,
Mhm,
surveillance data. I was wondering whether, especially for COVID, early estimates of the really basic stuff like the growth rate in the number of cases has been hugely problematic. Partly is the lack of good testing, partly is geographical spread in China, partly is ascertainment data, very difficult recognition of a huge array of symptoms. All of these problems were responsible for basically getting estimates even of the growth rate very wrong.
Yeah,
And,
okay. I mean, the thing is here, because this is about interventions, so we decided that we would focus on data that has to do with interventions, because
sense.
there is also another challenges paper that is specifically about data collection, or I don't know the exact title, but it's about data. So yeah, we don't want to have too much overlap with that. So we decided to focus on that data that is, let's say, specific for estimating the impact of interventions.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So that then
Yeah,
the problem is over.
yeah, if there is a link, of course, there are numerous links between estimating growth rates and intervention effectiveness. So, but then it should be in this chapter, the challenge should be specifically linked to interventions.
Yeah, I think the link probably in my head was how to trigger interventions or when to trigger interventions.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's probably a little bit out of the current paper.
Yeah, but
I
what
completely
we can
understand.
do is we
Yeah.
can definitely put in a reference to this other challenges paper that we say, okay, of course, there are also challenges involved in collecting the data, the early data about the growth rates and generation times. And then we give a reference to this other challenges paper.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Thank you. And the second question, there are some comments about estimating prevalence. I think in the surveillance data section.
Yeah.
I put a little comment there. For COVID, they sounded very optimistic, in my opinion. I don't think we have a real clue of what the prevalence is, in the sense that if, for example, we have a model that fits hospital data, and we can believe that hospital data is quite accurate, the number of hospitalizations at the national level, the number of people in ICUs every day, all that kind of stuff is quite accurate. But then you are always left with the problem that you can fit a model where 10 times more people get infected, but only a tenth of the ones you had before end up in hospital. And you would have a model that fits the same hospital data. Yeah.
I think we really should team up, because I really agree with you that it's like, I think this is exactly what I want to say, that it's not enough to use just hospital data, which is good. So you need to include something else, like, and that's something else. You want to say that it's also not very good. This is the seroprevalence data. Is that what you want to say? That it's
Yes, I mean the seroprevalence data would help, but also at the moment in the UK, it's one of the few countries. So in many countries, you do testing data, but that has a problem that only people with symptoms get tested.
yeah.
So you're not really testing everybody. Sometimes you try to test more asymptomatic people with some forms of policies, but it's not all. It's always kind of it's hugely affected by biases in how you decide to do that. The UK, as far as I understand, but I might be wrong, I might just know this because I'm in the UK only, that there are 2 community prevalence studies where people go out and just test at random, irrespective of symptoms, according to certain criteria. One is run by Imperial College, it's called the REACT study, and the other one is run by the ONS, Office for National Statistics in the UK. And maybe in other countries that there are similar studies, but I doubt there are 2 studies in the same country like in the UK, which is a problem for the UK because the 2 disagree with each other. It perfectly line with the confusion that COVID is bringing everywhere. But the key point is that those studies or the testing data in the community, which has problems of biases, might inform you of what happens outside. Seroprevalence outside of hospitals. Seroprevalence also can tell you something about what has happened outside of hospitals. But for example, in my model, I'm not currently fitting to those data streams. And so I can predict the hospital trend very well, but I don't really know what the prevalence outside of hospital is, because you can have a larger prevalence and a smaller hospitalization rate, and you would fit the same hospital data equally well, but get a completely different estimate of how many people have been infected in the country, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that estimating prevalence in an infection like COVID, where symptoms are so mild and heterogeneous, is quite challenging. And the only point is that paragraph sounded like, oh yeah, it's fairly easy to do because several modeling studies show that you can estimate it. And I'm like, this is not, to me, it sounds much more challenging than how it was written. That's all.
But
I was wondering whether other people have
that's
comments.
exactly what I wrote, I think, because like, okay, people, that's exactly what I wrote, because the data that you get, first of all, it's case notification data. It's good if it's like SARS, where the disease is symptomatic mainly. So you get most of the cases. But if it's like COVID, then a lot of people are symptomatic and you left only with a proportion of cases. Then you can go, okay, that data is not complete. There are lots of biases. There are delays in reporting because you get on the symptomatics. There are inherent delays in the system when people start to get to being tested, for example, only in the beginnings when they arrive to the hospital, but later probably other groups get included, those who have mild symptoms. Then that doesn't work very well. So you need to go to the doesn't work very well, but there have been a couple of papers actually in Science which show that if you include the mobility data and very like a lot of regions with case notification data, they say that they can estimate the true level of infection. So they basically can estimate true incidence to prevalence, which I cite them. I don't know, I didn't do it, but well, they say it's possible. So I included that. So then you need a lot of mobility data and regional case notification data. If you don't trust that at the national level, then you use the hospitalization data, which is more precise, as you say, because we believe that the people who get to hospital, they get registered. But then you have the problem is that you can have a larger prevalence in the population and a smaller hospitalization rate, or other way around. So then you don't know what's the true level of the prevalence in the population. And for that reason, I said there is a value of including other data sources specifically to fit the model and to estimate the parameters. So in my case, I included this seroprevalence data, for example. And then, well, even if you included that one data point, and it already helps, and it constrains the model and it helps to estimate.
No, certainly it helps. My point is that it still kind of doesn't solve all the problems, in the sense that seroprevalence data,
it's
you might have people
very good.
Well, exactly, but also like people are not picked up by the seroprevalence data and they are still immune, or people were picked up and then they lose their immunity. It's quite complicated even with seroprevalence data. I'm basically saying that all of these extra data set help a bit, but having everything, like still being able to kind of be sure about the prevalence is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these problems also occur in influenza epidemiology, trying to estimate the number of influenza cases in populations. So maybe it makes sense to look also there, what kind of data people have used to estimate the incidence of influenza or other, let's say, other infections with asymptomatic cases.
It's a bit, I was thinking, I heard a talk of Michael Höhle on the nowcasting in, I think in Bavaria. I don't know whether that is relevant. They seem to, in hindsight, they seem to be nowcasting pretty good. Well, that's still predicting data, a data stream, which is not the prevalence, of course, but it might be worth having a look at.
The number of cases or the number of hospitalizations, or what do they
predict? Well, they were nowcasting in the prevalence, so that was their ID.
Oh, yeah.
But of course, then you have to get a derivative of that again. The number of deaths, new hospitalizations, which you can check later. They seem to do pretty well, but I have no clue about data usually. I just want to say this might be relevant.
But I think they probably don't know more than, let's say, they will probably have the same problem of the pinning it down to a certain level. But if, I mean, the nowcasting basically means that given we have so many cases now, how many will we have in, let's say, in 2 weeks or something, taking into account the generation time distribution and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it depends on what you start with, in a sense. But I remember in influenza epidemiology, there were these different levels of reporting. So you have case notification, which of course only is the tip of the iceberg, because most influenza cases aren't even diagnosed by a doctor. And then you have, then there are these surveillance systems where people can report influenza symptoms to some system, and then there are kind of serological studies that tell you how many people have actually been affected, and you kind of see the surveillance pyramid with getting broader and broader towards the bottom. But of course, then it's unclear whether all people who have a seroconversion have actually been infected, in the sense that they can transmit to others, or whether it's just a kind of response of the immune system to some challenge. So even serological data doesn't give us complete, let's say, information on infection transmission. But okay, these are all challenges, very valid challenges, and that's what the paper is about. So we don't have to solve it, we just have to say what the challenges are, so that hopefully people in the future can work on it. Our future postdocs and PhD students.
I like your take, yes. Everything sounds a little bit easier now. Just say it's difficult and you can't do it, full stop.
That's yeah, Lorenzo, that's what this paper is about. It's not about solutions, it's about problems.
Can I ask another question about this prevalence thing? So I think it might be interesting, or at some moment you are going to see the prevalence, right? by depletion of susceptibles, which might be interesting. Before that, why do you want to know the prevalence? It's perhaps a very stupid question, but where does the prevalence come into?
But when you estimate all your parameters wrong, then your R0 is wrong, then your effective reproduction number is wrong. It's just wrong.
No, your R0 can be based on what you have from your hospital data, right? Like everything grows at the same exponential rate, also from a generation perspective.
Yes, to a certain degree, the R0 can be estimated also from whenever there is exponential growth. You're absolutely right. I have a couple of examples where the prevalence was helpful for me. Is, for example, not directly the prevalence, but say prevalence or incidence of infection. If people ask you, are we close to herd immunity? First of all, there is a big debate of what herd immunity is, with the fact that the population is heterogeneous and everything you want. Okay, but basically the question, how many people have been infected, means you would need to have a pretty good idea of the cumulative incidence up to now. And the hospitalizations don't really tell you the cumulative incidence in the population, how many people have experienced the disease. I know it's not directly prevalence, but prevalence / incidence also give you cumulative incidence ultimately. And obviously there is also loss of immunity at this point, which complicates the matter further. The other moment when the prevalence was very helpful for me is I was asked to model the risk of introduction of COVID in prisons or in any other kind of closed setting. And if you think that people come from outside of these settings and it's brought in, then you might want to give a rough estimate of what's the probability that they are infectious. And the outside prevalence is what I basically was using at that point.
Okay.
Over.
Yeah, thanks. That second point makes sense to me. The first point also makes sense, don't get me wrong, but there you have that extra point that you are going to ask questions about herd immunity once there is some impact of depletion of susceptibles present, right? Mm-hmm. So that is something which you can also see in hospital data, no matter what your probability of showing symptoms or whatever is.
Yeah, the other thing is that at some points, numbers of hospitalizations might be quite low. So for example, last summer, we had very low numbers of hospitalizations. They were too low to actually make any estimates from that. So in that situation, then case numbers are maybe somewhat more reliable. And hospitalizations are, of course, in particular age groups, and so we kind of miss out some age groups.
Yeah.
At least for COVID. I mean, again, these challenges should, of course, not only apply to COVID-19, but they should, let's say, be more general challenges that could also happen in future pandemics. Or, just don't let your thinking be constrained too much by COVID, but try to extract the, let's say, more generic problems and concepts from it. So sometimes it's useful to think about other infectious diseases as well.
But my approach at the moment is because I've just lived and died of a COVID for a year.
Yeah,
like everybody really.
I know.
Yeah, no. The key point is that to kind of think about the examples of challenges I've faced, and then try to write them in a way that is not only COVID related, but it's more generic. What this approach, I think, it's quite quite useful, but of course I'm going to miss all of the challenges that are in no way COVID related. And I know we are trying to avoid talking about sexually transmitted infections and so on, but there might be other, I don't know, a foot and mouth disease or other stuff that, although we don't want to kind of really talk at length, there might be challenges there that are not COVID related. So those ones I would miss, basically.
Yeah, modeling interventions which involve culling.
I don't see the problem.
Well, with foot and mouth disease, it's probably acceptable in some way. With human diseases, usually not.
Yeah, frowned upon.
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, do we only concentrate on human diseases, or are we also going to take animal diseases into account? We haven't actually ever discussed this. So it's not that we consciously excluded animal diseases. It was only that that we actually haven't thought about this yet.
I think we had a quick chat last time because I brought the same question. I think Ganna's opinion seemed quite sensible to me, which is to have talk about the various challenges, mostly coming from respiratory directly transmissible infections of humans that move fast, and then maybe have a final paragraph where we have other challenges. So it was, I don't know whether we want to do that, but it seemed like a sensible cutoff. Ultimately, there's no perfect answer, obviously.
But yeah, I mean, there is, of course, the issue of, let's say, zoonotic transmissions from animal populations to humans, which also happened with, which is to some extent an issue also in COVID, but also in influenza, definitely.
There will be a paper or two on the sort of modeling challenges coming from that transition from zoonoses to human disease.
Okay, so we don't have to think about that.
Again, I mean, you might want to say something, but that part is hopefully being covered. But that's not to say it's covering other sorts of diseases. But by and large, I think the emphasis has been on these sort of human, as Lorenzo was just summarizing, respiratory and so on. Some references to HIV and other things.
Yeah, I mean,
really
HIV I would also consider as a pandemic. With very different properties, which makes it interesting. I mean, different time scales, different contact networks, and so on. So I think it makes the discussion more interesting, not to only focus on respiratory diseases, but to also say something about HIV-like diseases.
We also mentioned last week briefly sort of vector-borne diseases and whether we should be saying something about those.
Yeah, that's again a different
sort
of dynamics.
I think there were some chats last week exactly on this. I thought there was an emphasis on something that is an epidemic rather than endemic infections. Otherwise we open a huge. And then there was the big question that appeared: what is HIV an epidemic or is HIV endemic? And then because there is no clear cut, we were kind of shying a little bit away from HIV for this reason. I agree with you. I mentioned last time, to me it's a pandemic, but then people were like, so what is a pandemic? And then I just dug myself a hole.
I think what we discussed is that I had the trouble writing this data section, because when you write about data and you start with like, okay, we need contact data, but then contact data for example, for the sexually transmitted infections, it's something different. You need to sexual partners, for example. You don't need to know this contact matrices that we use, for example. That's not relevant. And I thought that there is, I mean, it was difficult, like it's a broad spectrum, so how to refer to it and so on. And I think after discussion, we agreed that, okay, we want to talk about the challenges for something that is fast moving in real time, something like what we have now with COVID, you know? Well, you have to react fast, because if you have a long time that you can also, like find solutions, then you have more time to find solutions.
It doesn't help, as HIV shows.
Yeah,
We had very long time, but still there's no vaccine.
no, yeah, yeah.
I think
But for the HIV, I agree with that now. I mean, I think everybody agrees that now HIV is endemic. It used to be a pandemic like in the 80s, that time that it was spreading around the world, and it was going to different countries and to different groups of people, etc. And it was not controlled at all. And now it reached the state when it is a sort of endemic, more or less, everywhere. And then we try to solve the endemic.
But that means, but still, we should be interested in a future disease that is like, well, we should be interested in future pandemics that might not be like the present one. And one possibility is another sexually transmitted disease like HIV. And we should now it may, and I think we should and then there may be yet some other kind of pandemic which is not like any pandemic we've seen before, that if you use your imagination sufficiently. So once you get onto these unknown unknowns, perhaps there isn't very much we can say, but I think we ought at the very least to make it clear that we are aware of that. And I think that and I think that if we can say something about I mean, two things, I suppose. One is if we can say something about what will be different about the challenges of different kinds of pandemic, and probably on the whole you would stick to diseases you know about, like HIV, and say if there was another disease like HIV, what kind of interventions might we use? And with hindsight, you could use HIV as an example and say, if we look back on it, do we think that reasonably practical interventions, if they had been introduced to a greater extent in the 1980s and 90s, whatever, might have had led to a much better outcome? So I think thinking about other kinds of pandemics is a good idea. And I think the other thing it is probably legitimate to talk about is, sure, the topic of this volume is pandemics, not endemic disease. But having said that, one of the things that people are pointing out in the context of this pandemic is when you have a disease which, because of the way it works, because of the effects it has, we pay a huge amount of attention to, why are we still neglecting diseases like TB that kill a comparable number of people every year, endemic diseases? So, and TB I'm not an expert on, but certainly one of the routes of transmission is respiratory. You might ask, why do we not have more effective interventions against TB to help us drive the numbers of that down? So these kind of points may not be central to what we're writing about, but I think it enriches the paper if we are able to think in another dimension. It could, it sets a context for what we are discussing.
Lorenzo said previous time is that why we look, or why there is a big problem with this, that it overwhelms the healthcare system. So the TB kills people, but does it overwhelm the healthcare systems? So I think that was his point, and
but that's only because it's not prevalent that much in Western countries. I think in Africa, there are many people who die from TB, or at least from a combination of HIV and TB.
And there's diarrhea of the various sorts, isn't there? I mean, one of the unpalatable things is the whole inequality aspect of it, isn't it? If a disease affects people living in rich countries, it gets much more attention than if it if it's restricted to countries with poor people. And and there's hopefully, I suppose I have to say it's a sort of moral aspect to that. Maybe getting a disease like COVID, which really does affect everyone, maybe is a call to think a bit more about the diseases that affect neglected people. There's fortunately, there's a whole category these things are called, which is neglected tropical diseases. And if you ask why they're neglected, it's because on the whole they don't affect rich people.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of money going in it now.
Yeah, sure. No, I realize that there's been much more attention paid to neglected tropical diseases over the last 10 or 20 years, to the extent where perhaps they no longer deserve the name. But they're still neglected compared with COVID.
Yeah, no, I take this a bit to myself as well, because like as a mathematical modeler, I think dengue fever is one of the most interesting diseases to model mathematically as well, because you have those interesting interactions between different strains, which can make it worse and so on. And I haven't done so yet. So something which is mathematically very interesting.
But also, of course, if you look at these, but also, I suppose these endemic diseases, among them will have examples, like the one you just cite, of things that might be aspects of the next pandemic. So if we're trying to think, okay, so we thought that there's the fast-moving respiratory disease that we have at the moment. We can imagine another disease like HIV, but the examples of all these other endemic diseases, hopefully, give us should give us some more ideas of just what a range of possible pandemics there are that might come along.
And yeah, perhaps it, like yellow fever, it might get into the richer countries and get the attention. Like HIV really got the attention when Freddie Mercury died, I think. And it's a completely different thing. I think that anorexia nervosa really got attention when Karen Carpenter died, and so on.
Okay, so who died from COVID-19?
Yeah, not many famous people that were not likely to die in another way. No, but this is a bit what Bernard Silverman, I think, made as the problem of COVID. It's not that mild that you can ignore it, but it's also not severe enough that you have to do something.
And of course, and the major thing, which is which I think Bernard Silverman was also pointing to as one of the sort of wicked, as he calls it, assets of COVID, is that diseases are simple if either no interventions are needed or there are no interventions possible, or the other extreme if it is so obvious you have to intervene that no one disputes that you should intervene. And COVID, to an extent, is sort of in between, where you can see that there's some prospect of success from all the kind of interventions we're discussing, but they perhaps have social costs which are significant, and so you get into this interesting territory where, should you have an intervention? Should you open schools? Should you keep schools closed? All these kind of difficulties. So it's a very rich field for looking at interventions. Interventions have come much more to the fore, obviously, in this than in some previous pandemics.
Can I ask one other thing as well on this regarding the interventions? Some people must have thought about it. I'm just not up to date, but in many countries now have skipped their influenza wave a year, and in 2019 it was or 2019, 2020 was relatively mild, I think, in many countries. Do we expect an awful lot of influenza next year because of this, so that the healthcare system again gets...
That's a very good question. I mean, now, of course, it didn't happen because of the lockdown and people didn't have many contacts. But if we go back to having normal numbers of contacts, then and people are less immune, then one might expect quite a large seasonal influenza peak.
Because it has been problematic for the healthcare system in many countries in 2016, I think.
Yes, I was about...
That presumably depends a lot on which the most prevalent strains of flu are. So it's my understanding it's quite complicated. You know, you may get rather similar strains of flu for a number of years, and those are relatively easy to deal with, or they cause relatively little disease. And then 1 year you get taken by surprise with a more different strain, which suddenly causes greater problems. And which may, you know, sometimes is less lethal, sometimes more lethal than ordinary strains. So I don't know where we are in the sort of cycle of flu strains. But
here, I mean, they always gear up the vaccine that we get by whatever was the most prevalent things in the Southern Hemisphere, you know, the previous 6 months ago. And so if we haven't had a flu epidemic in Australia and New Zealand in the last year, they're going to find it more difficult to know how to gear it up, presumably.
I was about to mention the same thing, that it goes even beyond just influenza, in the sense that Australia, when they reopened during their summer, they had a massive outbreak of RSV, which usually doesn't occur in the summer, but it was simply displaced from the previous winter because everything was shut down because of COVID. So there are other infections that are not just influenza.
There's already, I can check the references, but people already looked what COVID will have, what impact the COVID will have on the dynamics of other infections like respiratory infections. And there have been papers published. So specifically for the US, but I can't recall exactly, but like people already mentioned that we will have next year's will be pretty hard. Yeah, for many diseases, because there is no RSV circulation, as Lorenzo says, there is no influenza circulation, and then and then everybody will be out, and the outbreak will be even worse than if we had it in the last year.
So, are you? I agree. I'm just paradoxically thinking then we should let COVID run a little bit rather than bringing it too much down. Otherwise, next year we'll have more COVID. Same reason. I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic at this point, but there is this problem. Yes, that if you stop stuff for a year, then there is a high chance of getting more of it the next year.
Here we stop something by accident, actually. Like we are not aiming at stopping influenza right this year.
And instead of being happy about it, we are paranoid about it.
Yeah, that's our job.
Yeah, but it's definitely also something that we could write about, at least mention that, let's say, the interaction with other infectious diseases. So if there is a pandemic with a new pathogen, what impact will it have on the epidemiology of other respiratory infections? I don't know, maybe that would fit into section 4.3.
Possibly. I was wondering whether VIPs in this matter have a better overview of the other challenges, and they feel like another paper would be most suitable for it. Dennis and Valerie, you are the VIPs I was talking about.
I don't think we're responding to being called VIPs.
Sorry, that's why I use the names afterwards.
I know. I think the problem is we probably don't know the answer, because the earlier papers, which are more concerned with the applications rather than the sort of methods, are less far on in general. And I imagine stuff to do with, you know, interaction between different pathogens might come more in there, but I don't know. I can't think of anywhere in the papers I'm more familiar with where it's appeared. Can you think of anywhere, Dennis?
No, not all.
I'm just thinking, you know, that maybe it would come in 5 or somewhere like that, but well, we haven't seen that to know.
Okay, I guess we can start maybe adding something here, and then if we find a better place, we'll move it.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth anything that it occurs, we should capture and worry about, you know, the fit a bit later on, maybe, so that it's covered somewhere.
Fast-moving papers for a fast-moving pandemic.
Well, the ideal is to get something out reasonably soon rather than trying to, you know,
No, I agree.
absolutely everything and just getting further and further behind.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But even so, we are trying, I think, to hope that the papers will have some relevance for a while by thinking very much about the sort of forward perspective and challenges for the future, which are obviously going to be, many of them, to be brought to mind by the problems that people are having now. But if we can think as much as we can about sort of more generic challenges and so on, that will be good too.
Okay, I'll make the overall document and put it on the Dropbox, and then invite everybody to put their latest text in it, and then we continue from there and put in all the interesting things we discussed today.
And I suggest that when people have put their text in the joint document, they should move the old files to the archive folder.
Should we make a separate archive for this chapter?
I think in the archive there is a.
There is one,
Okay.
I think.
Just check. Yeah, there's in the archive folder there's a certainly
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4 interventions folder. So,
Okay.
so it's just yeah.
It's only got one thing in it at the moment. It's got one Google Doc in it.
It will soon be joined by lots more. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, very, very quickly, I was just wondering if we talk about potential vector, so I'm going back to the discussion about birds with flu and the issue with mink that we've had with COVID, where does that go? It definitely doesn't go in the human behavior section that I'm working on. Is there a place that would be well suited for, or shall I just write a paragraph and it can be shoved somewhere afterwards? I don't quite have the overview. Maybe someone can tell me, please.
Yeah, I think it doesn't really. I think we decided that it doesn't really fit into this paper at all. But that we should refer then to the paper about zoonotic infections.
Yeah, yeah. But there might be a bit of an issue here, what you said about minks, which are very much, farm animals. You can also think of pets, which is a bit a different story. Like if dogs and cats get involved, that might be a different story than thinking of zoonotics, right? Or am I?
Okay, but it's, yeah, it's a bit different, but it's still within the, let's say, area of veterinary epidemiology. And I think, yeah, I think we decided for this paper that we are concentrating on the humans. And I mean, we can mention that there is the possibility to have cross transmission to other species, and then we refer to this challenges paper on zoonotic infections.
Yeah.
No,
Because
I'm happy with that. I'm just asking where that reference goes, just to be
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
that we have it in.
Yeah.
Maybe
I don't know yet what the best place is. Why don't you just leave it in your section if you have it there, and we can move it then later to a different place if that's better.
it might
Just
go
leave it in as so that we don't forget about it.
depending on I can't immediately see how it fits, but it might form part of the introduction, you know, things we're not going to consider very much, or a final discussion section on, you know, but there's also these things that we haven't considered further.
Yeah.
So either place it could go maybe.
The thing is, does it have, has it had a significantly major effect on the disease within humans in this pandemic?
Denmark had specifically targeted MPIs for the entire region of the country where they found mink outbreaks. In addition to the culling, they put a quarter of the entire country in lockdown when everyone else was allowed to mix in groups up to 30. So in terms of NPIs, it has had an effect.
Oh, really?
So we certainly
Yep.
ought to mention it. I mean, and if we can't think of anything particularly interesting, you know, if there's anything interesting related to human, yeah, I mean, if infection is human to mink back to human, then it's really, we can have to think of it as part of the human disease, don't we? So, but if there's nothing much we can say about it other than you will find that, you know, maybe if there's nothing particularly new we have to say about it, we can just refer to, first of all, you've just given an example that there are countries where this has been taken into account in restrictions on humans, so interventions into how humans should behave. And secondly, we can refer to, as you say, perhaps the previous challenge paper on zoonotic diseases. But I think that there's 2 points that perhaps should be mentioned somewhere.
I mean, of course, it is conceivable that this would play a larger role in future pandemics. So if you have an infection that can, let's say, use some animal population as a reservoir and come back into the human population, that would make elimination much more difficult.
Well, I mean, you get it's a sort of rather at the other extreme of, you get disease like rabies, which is mainly a zoonotic disease, but does affect, well, I think it doesn't, you don't get human to human transmission, do you? I mean, well,
I don't think
I mean,
so, no.
well, presumably, potentially, if a human with rabies bit another human, they could infect them, but it's not, it hopefully has an R well below 1. But you can imagine a disease somewhere in between, can't you? I mean, there might be a disease which, there could be a pandemic which was serious in humans, but was relatively easy to eliminate, except that it had such good animal reservoirs that you had that caused a difficulty for eliminating it. So it's yeah, on the spectrum one needs to think.
So we could mention that possible mechanism and then refer to this other challenges paper.
Yeah, sounds good.
I guess any of the sort of wild bird type things
like avian influenza.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's the closest I can think of to an example that fits.
No,
Then.
that's probably a better example, isn't it, Valerie?
Well,
I mean, there has been some human-to-human transmission of avian influenza.
But also way below 1, and are way below 1,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But I mean, you could imagine that it kind of that there is an evolution so that
Yeah.
they are increases and it can be.
sorry.
I thought that was very specifically the reason why people were so concerned with avian flu.
Mm.
They thought that if it got enough opportunities of challenging humans, then it might well evolve into something that had significant human-to-human transmission.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
but my gut feeling is that you're either afraid that it spreads among humans with a high R, or it spreads, it keeps on spilling over.
yeah.
But that both keep on playing an important role. You don't expect that much.
Yeah. But I mean, I suppose, I mean, it comes back to, I mean, COVID itself is a zoonotic disease that has got into humans. So, so may well be that the environment or one of the earlier challenge papers here may want to refer to that.
Then again, now we don't worry about further transmission from animals of COVID into the human population. The problem we have as humans causing it to each other are already big enough.
Sure.
We can ignore it in the models. That's what.
Yeah.
The mink population might be an exception where you.
Okay, but I mean, just let's say hypothetically, you could imagine that there is some virus that emerges and that can be transmitted between humans and dogs. So people would infect their dogs and the dogs would infect the humans back.
Yeah. Now there was some talk about that COVID. They did at least research on
I know
dogs
that
and
COVID
cats.
can infect cats, but I think it's not cats that infect humans, as far as I know.
I think there were some anecdotal evidence of a child infected that way, but.
There are beautiful pictures of the 1918 influenza pandemic with everybody with a mask, including the cat.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. If I find it, I'll circulate.
Yeah, send it around. That sounds like a nice picture that you can use in a presentation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think possibly a challenge paper 2 on the has things, we'll have say things relevant on this. So maybe that's the thing to refer to, but we should just have a few remarks about the interventions context.
Okay, we'll keep it in mind. I think then we are at more or less at the end of our session today, or are there still any comments or questions? Then if not, then thanks everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. I think you're doing a grand job herding people in the right direction.
Thanks. Yeah, so we'll see each other next week again, and in the meantime, try to continue on the draft.
Yeah, and maybe either just with email or through the Slack channel, maybe keep us a little bit updated as the combined paper comes together.
Okay.
That'll be helpful. Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thanks. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Weekend, not sure what it is, but good. Thank you.